So the plan for today is I'll be step by step, we'll be analyzing the Pentacam quad map. Basically, Pentacam is huge. So I think the most important for any refractive and corneal surgeon is the quad map. So I'll just take through the ultra small things that we need to look into the Pentacam. And in between, Dr. Himanshu shall be giving his very important practical tips at each and every step of the map presentation. So I won't go into the technicalities, but broadly, as we know, the cornea can be studied by reflection-based and elevation-based topographies. So we know over years that elevation-based is a must for at least refractive surgery today, more so because we cannot see the posterior surface on any Placido-based disc. So let me not go into the theory of both because that's there everywhere. But Pentacam today stands to be the most commonly used device and probably can call it the gold standard till any other Schleimpflug based technology takes over. So the advantage being you can study from the cornea to the lens and lot of utilities in the Pentacam. So today we'll mostly stick to using the Pentacam as a pre-refractive tool. So through this 45 minutes plus presentation, we'll learn how to get a reliable scan. Basic emphasis all of us would want to know is how to pick up the earliest form prostate keratoconus so that you don't land up doing a refractive surgery. Picking up keratoconus or Flun 1 is very easy. And the biggest importance of Pentacam is basically how do we pick up these very early cones or FFKCs. So I've just divided the whole presentation into 1 to 8 steps for ease of everyone. So as we know, anyone who owns a Pentacam and works with it, you know there are plenty of maps available, plenty. So the map which we generally give a print to the patient or the first thing we analyze is this single map or the quad map. So there are two ways in which we can have this. Usually the top left is the front elevation, then you have the back elevation, then you have the thickness map, which is usually common with all surgeons. The fourth map on the bottom right is something you can either have a minimum, maximum refractive, or you can have a sagittal or topography. So this is basically what we're going to see today. What's the quad map? So I've divided the map into such zones for the ease of explanation and discussion. And very first thing before you start interpreting any map, not only the Pentacam, but anything, is to please cross-check the demographics. So it's not very uncommon that your technician in a hurry changes the person's filing, or the date may not be right, or a lot of things like that. So make it a habit to please cross-check the 3-point identification, what we call the name and at least the gender and the date of birth. So you're at least sure you're looking at the same person's scan. So after we do that, the next thing, because most of us won't do the investigations, mostly our technicians or optometrists who do it, we need to make sure before we analyze that it's a reliable scan. So this is not technicality, but briefly how the Pentacam head works. So this is how an animate of the machine working. So you have a slit illumination and the Schleimpflug camera which goes around. So as you see here, this is illuminating the cornea, and there's the camera which goes ahead. Now, when Pentacam came in, the biggest plus point they told us is the movement does not affect as much as in a Placido base, but believe me, it does majorly affect if the patient is moving. It is much better than a Placido base, but still you cannot read a Pentacam which has had even a subtle movement. It will look like a FFKC or a scar or quite irregular. So again, this is the actual patient view. Now, when you have so many disturbing things, you have a light, you have a camera flashing, it's very important to tell your patient to please look at the central dot. We'll go in depth with this in this next session next week, but this is how the scans are obtained. You can either have 25 or 50 scans, and you for each angle, you have a Schleimpflug image. Now, why this is important is when you go to the overmap, you can actually slide through all the 25 scans and make sure, as in this left corner, that it is centered to your visual axis. That means the patient has probably looked straight and it is a good scan. So here you see a volunteer who's just moving his eyes during the scan. So obviously, if this Pentacam is read by us, it would not be normal. So sitting in our OPD, how do we know this? There's something called as a QS. So QS means quality specification. So it should be white background and it should say okay. So many times you'll have a red or an yellow. Red means it certainly needs to be repeated, and yellow is a borderline scan. So if you go and right click on that, you will see a lot of things. So this patient, it says cornea friend, there is a data gap, and inferiorly there is a 3D model deviation. So probably this patient has not opened his eye sufficiently and also has moved. So these are again very erratic, and we should not look into these maps. Now, whenever these maps are extrapolating, like say the lid is covering maybe 2 mm, you'll have black spots, as I'll show you in the future slide. So that black spots in the periphery would show that it's not a completely captured scan, and it's an extrapolated data. So make sure before you even start, you look at the demographics and that the quality score is good. Now, many times as we start, you will see a lot of these irregular cornea. This is a post LASIK, and you see the data is yellow and the QS in the posterior is again bad. This is a very, very bad keratoconus, very advanced. Again, the data is red. Again, here the data is yellow. So this doesn't mean that they are bad scans. Now, somehow the pentacam in very irregular corneas, how many ever times you do a perfect scan, it does come in yellow and red. So in such cases, what you can do at least 3-4 scans and look at the interscan difference. So if every scan is not showing you a big difference, maybe within 5 to 10 microns of the pachy and the elevation, that means it is a fine, good scan, but the machine is showing you because it's a very irregular cornea. So this is something we need to know. So whenever you have a red or an yellow, ensure that you repeat it and check at the machine if it is repeatable. Yes, Dr.
Can I come? Yeah.
Yes.
So a few parts which you took, especially the demographic part. Remember one thing, demographic part, many times the people have habit of putting Mr., Ms., Kumari, those kind of things. Make sure such kind of things are not done. Make sure when the person comes for a repeat scan, the ID number is put first and name is searched, and then do the scan in the same folder. Same name, same folder, same machine can only be compared if, even if on the same machine, if you do the scan on a different name and a different folder, it cannot be compared with. And that's the importance of your demographic part there. When Dipti was talking about the about the loss of data part, now she said that there are black spots there. Now, black spots are something called interpreted data. They're not true data, but it also does not mean there is total data loss from there. But to be on the safer side, there is one more option where we can convert that into white area where the pentacam does not show the data from there. The advantage of that is that it shows you only the data which is reliable. Disadvantage, many times the scans do not look very nice. So if you're interpreting such kind of scan, when you're giving it to patient, when you're interpreting that, please remember those peripheral data loss area, you may not give too much importance. Also, whenever Dipti was talking about the quality score, now say this patient, when she is showing here, the quality score shows red, very advanced cone, and quality score shows red. Now, does it mean that multiple times when you do and then we take it, it would be more reliable? Not exactly. When there's a quality score loss, that also is related to the loss of raw data which pentacam is generating. So it's very important in such kind of cases to go back to your Scheimpflug image and see the loss of raw data. Now, if the because the cone is advanced, there can be scarring there in such kind of area, or there is a intracorneal ring implant there, intact there, which gives back scatter, and there is loss of data in that area. Now, whenever we are interpreting topography of that area, wherever there is data loss, that area would not be very reliable. So in advanced cone, whenever we don't just go by the number that, okay, red, yellow or something. If something which is there, which is repeatable, which is not able to, we cannot remove it, then make sure you go back to the raw data and look at the data loss in which area. And that area, you may not give too much importance to your interpretation there, and be open that you may have issue there. Now look at the loss of data in which surface you have, the anterior corneal surface, posterior corneal surface. If there's significant loss of data in anterior surface, we know that the corneal thickness is measured from anterior elevation, subtracted from the posterior elevation, subtracted from anterior. So if one of that surface is not reliable, of course, the corneal thickness would not be reliable. If the scar is deeper enough, the posterior surface may not be reliable, and so would be the corneal thickness, which would not be reliable. So a deeper scar, anterior surface, if the quality score is good and the raw data is good, you still can rely upon that. So whenever you see such kind of thing, it's always better to look at the raw data where we are missing out on things. Please go ahead with me.
Great, sir. Thank you.
Also,
Now,
Dr. Dipti, if you may add,
yes, sir.
it may look a little silly, but this exam date, whatever we see, so sometimes it will be in the US notation, as we see here. First
Correct.
the month comes, then the date comes. So if it is 4th of June or anything, there will be always some confusion. So whenever we see, different hospitals have different exam date notation, whether it's a US type or the Indian type. So we just have to keep that in mind in any of the reports for that matter, whether it's a visual field or with a pentacam or any other OCT. Thank you. Please continue.
True, sir. Very true. That's a very, very important practical point. Now, again, the third very important thing, especially in Pentacam, is how you have standardized your parameters. So there are three variations, important three variations, which I'll touch upon. So you can have either absolute or relative. You can have different options of color schemes a Pentacam gives. And then the third very important thing is the steps. Now, I'll come back to this. This is something what is recommended by Professor Bellin, but all of us do change it depending on how we like the things to be. But this is overall generally something which helps us pick early FFKCs. So now how does it help? Now there is an option when you go for either sagittal or tangential graft, either have a relative or an absolute scale. So this is a patient A, 2012 and 2015. I'm looking only at the sagittal. And obviously over the 3 years, the central case 47 has become 56 and 56 in the inferior has become 53. That's just because of the cone which has increased. Now this is another patient where again in 2012 and 15 changed. Actually, this is not another patient, this is the same patient. So in the first, it is a relative scale, and in the second, the lower two, it is an absolute scale. So we need to know the difference because we need to see what is best suited in our practice. Now, relative scale, basically, if you come back to here, now in the left map in 2012, the lowest is 14 diopters and the highest is 74 diopters. And in the 2015, it is 10 and 70. That means it is varying depending on that day's cone. But in an absolute scale, it is in both 10 to 90. So the importance here is like if you want to pick up smaller things and you want to enlarge your minute deficiencies, then a relative would be slightly better. But if you want to have a comparison between two scales, then absolute is good. So if you can have one of these as your standard, but if you're looking at progression of keratoconus, you can always change it, ask your technician and give an absolute. Or if you want to pick up an FFKC, go to the machine and go to a relative and have a look. It's always nice to have a standard one. Don't keep asking him to change, but you should be aware of what are the other things so that if you have a doubt, you can always go to the machine and check it. So relative and absolute.
Yeah, so one point I would come here. So if you look at the steps here, it's 1 diopter steps, right? Okay. Now, what happens is whenever you put 1 diopter step, you reduce the sensitivity of the machine. So when you have a cone which is very advanced and it looks really bad and you still want to see the shape of the cone or something, you can reduce the sensitivity by increasing the step. So 1 diopter, you do that. So earlier everything which was looking red color, now it may show some pattern there. Now same time, if you have a refractive patient and you want to really rule out a small step which is there and you really don't want to miss that, you increase the sensitivity by reducing the steps. So you put the step of 0.25 there, and where a small defect which was not looking so obvious earlier may become a little more enlarged. By default, most of us use 0.5 step. Now, if you are doing a scan only for one time, if it is not multiple time, as Dipti said, that if you are following up a case of keratoconus where you want to see the progression. In that case, to compare two scans, it's better to have relative scale because it's not going to change too much. Whereas if you put absolute scale, even in your setting, and one printout would look little different from another printout because computer would have taken the scales little differently. So if you are looking at the printouts only, it may not be a bad idea if you, so ideal way to compare the scan is never printout. Looking at printout is comparing apple with oranges. But still, if you do not have a choice to go to the machine and look at that, or do a difference map, or do a subtraction analysis, at least have a standard protocol where your scale is maintained every time. Hence, you can compare that. What she gave you the clue was practicality part, that very early cone or something which is fishy, you want to enlarge it, reduce the steps to 0.25 diopter. Something which is very abnormal, you want to reduce that abnormality and see something at least there, then increase the step by 1 diopter.
So yes, if you want to pick FFKC, as we discussed, a relative scale probably would pick it up much better. Now, this is exactly what Dr. Himanshu also mentioned. There are different color schemes which are available. The common ones are Holiday American and Bellin. So generally, we keep it at Bellin because somehow I feel the color scales are such that an early FFKC is picked. But someone who is used to a Placido base, they would want to keep an American color for a few days because that is something which looks like a TMS or something. Similar topography. Now, this is exactly what Dr. Himanshu said. Now, when you are in your OPD and look at these scans, obviously the scan 3 is something which hits on your face compared to a scan 1. So note here, all of them, the highest elevation is 71, 71, 71. But why is the lower looking so obvious? Exactly what he said is your steps. So either the upper one is 25, it's a very coarse one, not at all ideal for picking up FFKCs or even KCs. So 5 micron step is good. And if you want to pick up more closely, you can go and shift it to a 2.5 micron, which will make the small cone look very obvious. So the whole idea of these color settings is to make sure you're not, the numbers are anyway same. If you sit and analyze, you will see a 71 micron cone, but just giving you a pattern analysis so that you don't miss up any of these. Yes,
Dipti, can you just direct and show where is this 25 microns, 10 microns is written?
So here,
because
sir,
some
now
people
when,
will,
okay.
so exactly that.
Now,
so just
is my pointer visible? Is my pointer
no,
visible?
pointer is absolutely visible. No issues.
Yeah. So now with the 25 micron steps, now the central part is 71 here. Here is where you can right click and change the shape. So this is 25, this is 10, and this is 5.
Perfect. So person first time who is reading and all, they will know exactly where to look at it actually. Thank you. Continue.
Okay. So even with your printouts, even if you don't have the machine, you can always do this. And if you have something suspicious at 10, you can always ask the technician to give you another print at 2.5. So the patient doesn't have to be there. All this can be done even after the scan is done. So whichever center you're sending them, you can always ask them to send it in a 2.5 micron step.
So Dr. Deepi, what you're telling is that even if the scan is done, patient is not there in front of you, you can always in the technician can alter these values even of taking the picture.
Very true, sir.
Right?
Very true. Yeah.
That's good. So you can ask the person and they can send the printout or a directly soft copy of that.
Exactly.
So that will be very handy. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you know this, we can always tell them, make the relative, make it 2.5, make it 0.5 and topography, and the print can be given in 5 to 10 seconds. So we don't need a patient for that. You just have to have a good QS value and a good scan, maybe 2 to 3 repeatable scan is enough. So the whole idea here is basically make a pattern for yourself. So you're seeing the same color scales. It's easy for you to pick up, especially in a busy OPD, not to miss any FFKCs. So this is what is the standard. We can probably share it in the group. So we can do small changes. I'm sure Dr. Himanshu will have different, Dr. Vidya Shankar may have different, but overall, this is something which is recommended and works well. And this is very important to keep it 9 mm. So today we had a discussion on pellucid. So where 9 mm, I would just show you where it is 9 mm. So here, especially when you go to a topography map, these are the scaling. So 0 is the apex, then this is 2, 4, 6, 8, and this is up to the 9 mm dia. So there is an option to make it 12. 12 is not required for your regular refractive cornea practice. You would want it to, if you're looking at a Terriens or a Pellicid, or you want to look at the extreme in your PK. So that is something you can go and do, but otherwise keep it around 8. Most of the refractive practice, 8 diameter is good enough. Now coming to the next step, once you're done this, now is when you start your interpretation. So the main advantage of a pentacam or any tomography is your elevation maps. So a very brief thing on what exactly is the elevation map. Now, every thing on Earth, anything you want, you need a reference surface to see how high it is from a baseline. So if you have Mount Everest, Alps, or Dead Sea, how do you know which is tall or short? So for us on Earth, it is the sea level. So this is 29,000 feet, this is 15,000 feet above. So you know, yeah, Mount Everest is higher, and you have the Dead Sea, which is below. So unfortunately, in your eye, there is no sea level. You cannot use the lens, nor the iris, nor anything as a reference level for your cornea. So any of these scans where it's an elevation based, you need to have a machine generated sphere or any shape that you can get. So in the pentacam or the knob scan, you have an imaginary sphere which is built by the machine, which the dia of which is closest to your cornea. So for example, this is a steep cornea, you'll have a steep sphere. If you have a flat cornea, you'll have a flatter sphere. So the sphere that closest matches your prolate cornea is the BFS. And BFS is usually picked by the machine. There is an option where we can change it, but that is something which is machine generated. So as soon as your scan is done, again, a very important thing, as Dr. Vidya Shankar said, every of your print on the top, you will have elevation front, and then you have a BFS. So 6.66 is something which it has chosen. So it has chosen quite a steep BFS. So you know you're looking at a steep cornea, and the diameter is usually between 8 to 9. So some surgeons like it to have it at an 8 dia, and some surgeons would like it around 9. So once the sphere and your cornea is overlaid, the prolate cornea, the areas in the cornea which are above the sphere comes in positive colors like I'm showing here in yellow and red shades, and the areas which are below the BFS comes in cooler colors, which is blues and purples, and this is usually same in all the topography machines. And the areas which are in level with your BFS generally are in tones of green. So as soon as you look at the hot colors, means there is something abnormal you're looking at. Now, this is very, very crucial, the normative data for your elevation maps. So the normal data for your anterior elevation would be 12, and anything more than 15 certainly is a red flag for you. And when you go to the posterior or back surface, it's usually a protocol 5 microns more than the anterior. So it is 17, and more than 20 would be an abnormality. And this is a very, very important point, which I find useful, is if in the same spot, say you're holding the cursor on this spot of the anterior, and it is around 6, but posterior is showing 25. So if the area, the difference between anterior and posterior is more than 5 microns, and again, it is suspicious. So many times you can have anterior totally normal and posterior again within 20, but it may be around 18 to 19, and the difference may be around 9 to 10 microns. So along with this, references also know that at the same point, usually in the central cornea, the difference ideally should not be more than 5 microns. So I'll show you a few scans, then I'll stop for Dr. Himanshu's opinion on this. Now, whenever you look at a cornea like this, now this cornea, as I told, is anterior, and we don't want anything more than 15. But here, look at these areas, it is 16, 18. So am I looking at something normal? No. So these normal data is only for the central cornea or the area around the thinnest area. So you could consider the central 4 to 5 millimeter area. And in that area, if something is more than that, it is abnormal. So this is certainly normal, and this is the normal saddle pattern. So as you know, in a high astigmatism, the extremes are always steep and flat. I wouldn't call steep or flat, but elevated and depressed. So always ignore this peripheral thing, and this is a typical saddle or an astigmatic cornea. So what you have to look at as the central 3 to 4. So I'll show you a few maps. Now this is called a saddle pattern in elevation. We don't call it steep or flat. We call it in pattern, saddle pattern or an island pattern. So island pattern is something which is more suspicious, and these areas in the center, if you have more than 15 or 18, then certainly they're suspicious. So this is a normal astigmatic cornea. Now this is something which again is a red flag. So this is an astigmatic cornea, but protrusion of this peripheral saddle. So as you see here in the posterior, it is protruding and almost gone to 46. So this is again a pattern you would see in keratoconus in astigmatism. This is exactly what I was saying. Now, anterior surface of this third map if I would press on the thinnest, would be around 3, and this is around 16 in the posterior. So if you go back to what is Bellin's recommended normal, it is still okay. But the difference here is too high, 3 and 16, so it is 13. So difference of 13, though it is within 20 microns, I would call it an early posterior cone. So that 0.5 micron difference is generally missed by many, and I think that is very important. And this patient actually is an FFKC, the other eye is a frank keratoconus. So very important, look at early invasions and also make sure there is a difference of less than 5 microns. So again, isolated small islands like this are something to be a little careful of. This I covered. So ideally keep your BFS around 8 to 9, don't play much with it. And this, let us not go into it. There is a way you can change the BFS. If you can make it ellipsoid or toric ellipsoid, not for regular practice, but yes, there is a utility in that, but we may not be able to cover the entire thing here. So for an example, if you have the BFS as a sphere, this is the pattern. And the same patient, when I make the sphere, instead of a sphere, if I make it a toric ellipsoid, it looks a little different. So this is one last point I would want to tell on elevation maps. Now this patient, we were following it up for progression of keratoconus, July 2011, and after more than 1.5 years, she comes back. Now, if you analyze forget the anterior, the posterior, it is 35 and it has become 60, certain progression, and 48 in the sagittal has become 50, good progression. But look at the front surface. This was 9 and this is only 16. So when I see so much difference in the curvature, why is the anterior surface not showing difference? That is because of this very important thing. Now, every time you do a scan, the BFS is chosen for that particular scan. So in July, it has chosen a BFS of 7.84. And this time in 2012, it has chosen a BFS of 7.59. So it has chosen a steeper BFS. That's why the difference between the BFS and elevation is not looking too much. So there is an option. Again, this can be done after the patient is gone. You can always tell your technician. You can click on it, right click, and change the best fit sphere to what was taken in the first scan. So when I did that, obviously the elevation is much higher. Now 16 actually is 30 when you do the best fit sphere matching. So again, this is a very, very important thing. Even if you've had referrals, you can always tell your technician to please match the BFS so that you actually know the true progression based on your elevation. So this has to be matched for the anterior as well as for the posterior. So it's extremely important. So again, an FFKC tip is if you want to basically look at progression, always read it only after matching your BFS. So Dr. Himanshu, your inputs on the elevation.
Okay, so one thing, remember that there's no topography in the world which is ideal. You cannot describe a shape by any topography. So everything, whatever you describe, you have some fallacies. And here we have a system where we are trying to fit a spherical surface forcibly on a corneal surface and try to see how much variation is there. So please remember, there is no topography which is ideal. This is not a shape of cornea. What you are seeing in topography, this is not how a cornea shape would be. But this is a depiction. And when you have a depiction, you rather have something which is repeatable. Right? Now, somebody asked the question that why best fit sphere? Why not best fit ellipsoid? Sure, you can take anything. You can take ellipsoid. I use many times torus also. I'll come to that. Now, the thing is, based on the axis and everything, that scan will keep on showing different shape. And it may not have excellent repeatability. It may not have a diagnosis which is possibly a form-based diagnosis where you can look at the form factor, you can look at the shape, you can look at how it looks like, and based on that, you can make a diagnosis, which does not happen there. So can we use best fit sphere? Can we use best fit ellipsoid? I don't think that question is very relevant. I would say we stick to one thing. What is the strength of this machine is best fit sphere. and it's better to stick to best fit sphere. Now, remember one thing, when you forcibly fit something in a spherical shape, your area of contact, majority of the area of contact is in center part. Center 6 millimeter zone is the area of contact, or rather I would say 4.5 to 6 millimeter zone is where maximum area of contact would be. Anything beyond that in your elevation map is not so greatly reliable, not so greatly interesting, right? So when we have elevation based topographer, we can't bet our entire money on say, you know, I only look at the elevation maps only, anterior and posterior elevation map. Interesting part is that though the data is collected from the elevation data, but when the data is interpreted and it's shown as a keratometric map, that shows much more irregularity, it shows much more details there. So remember that we just can't bet our entire money on elevation maps only, because center part, it may show, it may hide many things where your curvature map can show them. Also, whenever we talk about comparing the elevation data, as Dipti said, it's very important to remember that unless we compare it with the previous number, it may not be very comparable. Now, at the same time, we also have to remember that whenever there is a problem with the edge detection, which so basically Pentacam, what it does, it throws a slit on the cornea. A corneal slit gets illuminated, and then like our Photoshops and those things do, where it can draw an outline around you, which can detect an edge of your photograph. Same way here, the edge detection protocol marks out the edge of your slit. So if the edge of the slit is not properly marked because of anything, scarring, because of any high reflection from the light or anything like that, your raw data or the points would not be accurate. And how the best fit sphere is measured? Well, it joins all the points together to make a parabole, and then it joins as a surface. So whenever you have anything which is looking abnormal, you can look at the raw data also, that am I looking at anything? Now, please remember, the diagnosis of any disease or anything based on only topography is only done in your MS exams or DNB exam or DO exams. In real life, we never diagnose anybody for anything based on just topography. So if you've seen the patient, if patient has scar in the center part, nebular corneal scar in the center cornea, I know that I'm not going to pay too much attention to that elevation map, which is showing me some false elevation. So remember that clinical correlation is extremely important when you are interpreting data. It's very simple. Elevation-based topographer can have two types of pattern. Either it can have island pattern or it can have saddle pattern. Now, if the topography, entire topography, all the topography are simplified in that way that it can show only two patterns, you can remember we can miss out on many things. And that's the reason where the morphological diagnosis can be missed out if you are only looking at elevation-based data. Right? So it's extremely important elevation-based data, but just pay attention that there can be many times where there can be some issue with that too.
Dr. Dipti, you can continue, I think. Also, I just wanted to know whether after the scans are being done, can the technician just alter the diameter and whether you can have a 9 millimeter or 12 millimeter as well?
Yes, sir. Any of these changes which we are explaining, from colors to scales, everything can be changed, sir. You just have to tell them what you need and it can be provided.
Vidya, the actual measurement is only the slit image which computer is taken. After that, everything is mathematical calculation, which can be done, everything can be done later on. Once the computer has raw data, later on, it's the program which changes the way, so it can be done, of course.
Only most important thing is to make sure, which we discussed in the beginning, is to have it in the same folder. So if it is done in a different folder, you can never combine both the data to get a comparison. So that's the only thing. You need a good quality score and make sure it is in the same patient folder data. Those are the only two things to be looked at during the scanning. So we'll go on to the K readings. Now we're done with the elevations. So there are two places you can either have your K readings and then you need to look at your topographic maps. Now these are simulated to your keratometry. They try to give you a steep and a flat axis, simulated K1 and K2. And basically for practical purpose, let me not go in through this. Okay. So this is where you get your anterior SIM-K, K1 and K2 along with your astigmatism. Again, very important, down you always see this K-max. So K-max is a good parameter to check, especially if you're looking at progression of keratoconus. Another thing is the KPD. KPD, to tell you briefly, is the keratometry value of your posterior surface. So how the machine calculates, it subtracts the true net power, the entire power at that spot, and subtracts it with an anterior curvature. So KPD is the actual keratometric value of your posterior surface. And normal is anything less than 0.75, and if it is more than 1.5, it is suspicious. So again, this may be a good tool if you're looking at, a borderline cornea or FFKC, things like that. Remember, it should be less than 1.5. Topography is one of the most crucial things. So how do we study it? Even from Placido-based, we know the patterns, a little similar here, but here it's not a reflection based, but your topography or your surface is derived from your elevation based maps. So this is a very good pattern. This compares most of our patterns which we get on either a Placido or on your Pentacam. So let me go through how we can divide these patterns and which patterns would give us an yellow sign or a red sign. So we can divide all these patterns as symmetric patterns, asymmetric, skewed, and special. The same, actually, these all started with the Placido based. Now, when you look pattern 1, that is the symmetric or the green patterns. So the round, the oval, the symmetric bow tie, these are the typical main 3 symmetric patterns. So whenever you look at a symmetric pattern, you're a little okay because at least the corneum is not very irregular. And when you look at the symmetric pattern, you should also look at the max K. So you can have a Banks central keratoconus, a max K of less than 47.2 diopters is something okay. So again, these are no golden rules. These are values which have been derived. It doesn't mean 47.3 is abnormal or 47 is normal. These are just guidelines. So when you have a symmetric pattern like a round, oval, or a symmetric bow tie and more than 50, as we had a case today, again, that is a red sign, not in terms of keratoconus, but in terms of refractive surgery. So then you come to your asymmetric patterns. So very typical 4 asymmetric patterns, very popular even during the Placido days. Superior inferior asymmetry is what we call. So you can either have an isolated superior steep pattern like in map 3, or an isolated inferior, or you can have a bow tie with an irregular tie. Now, whenever you have asymmetric pattern, always go back to these refractive maps and look at around the 4 mm zone. If you're superior, inferior, what is the difference? Now, we can tolerate a superior difference a little more than inferior because keratoconus usually is inferior. So if you have a superior inferior difference of more than 2.5, when superior is steeper, it again is something abnormal. And in inferior steepening of more than 1.5 in these patterns is again something you should look at carefully. Now, skewed patterns, we have these 2 important skewed patterns. Again, these are quite suspicious, and whenever there is skewing, so how do you know what is an abnormal? You do not have any topographies perfectly perpendicular. So just magnify these, and the 2 principal meridian, just see the axis. So if it is less than more than 22 degrees of skewing, then that is something which would be a red flag for your refractive surgery. And last one would be special patterns. Usually they are usually keratoconus, pellucid, or scarred cornea. So claw pattern, junctional pattern, butterfly, and these irregular. So these four are usually suspicious of some irregular cornea, may not be keratoconus itself. So all these give us a sort of guidelines to see what pattern you're comfortable and what you're not. So whenever you're reading a map, there is a magnitude and there is a pattern. So your magnitude would be the average, the K is at 46, 47, and your pattern would be these patterns. So this is a good table that I find very useful. It's there in Professor Mazin's book, and I'll share it in the group. So again, this puts all these criteria in high risk and moderate risk for refractive surgery. Again, another tip on picking up FFKCs, there is an option of going either sagittal or tangential. I find this extremely useful. So I've just added a few signs here. Now, this is a left eye of the same patient, right eye of the same patient. Now, what I've kept here is sagittal. So this abnormally certainly is abnormal. You have probably a vortex sort of pattern, and left eye is looking normal. Now, as soon as I change it into tangential, the left inferior is suddenly much steeper. So here it is 43 and 44, but in tangential it is 42 and 46, which is certainly much higher than 1.5. So and even here you have a good localization of the cone. So what exactly is sagittal and tangential? This is the physics. Basically, sagittal has a single reference point or optical axis, but tangential picks up smaller abnormalities. So as a golden rule, you can keep it sagittal, but whenever you are not in refractive process and want to pick up FFKCs, I find tangential is much better. And another utility for tangential is if you have a quite eccentric cone or you're doing a graft and you want to isolate the cone. So sagittal actually doesn't allow us to isolate the cone. The best two parameters are to look at the posterior back surface. Now this is the sagittal and this is the tangential of the same patient. Look at the lower right maps. So in the tangential, you actually see the cone is much more, you get to know the borders and things like that. So two utilities I would say is when you're planning a DALC and you want to eliminate the entire cone, look at the posterior elevation and look at your tangential. Same if you want to have a decentered C3R or protocols like that. To localize your cone, again, tangential is very good. And one last point in this is there is an option of mirror imaging or showing both your right and left scan, and this is extremely useful. So God generally has made both our cornea mirror images. And whenever you have subtle differences between the right and left eye, just ask the technician to give this right-left map. And if it is not a mirror image and a lot of other scans are abnormal, then again, something that you're looking at. So again, a K of more than 49, astigmatism of 6. Again, the rule is again very suspicious along with the patterns I have described. So always this is another map that you can use where you can compare directly the right and left map. Yes, on to Dr. Himanshu.
Okay, so Dipti, you took a lot of points here. So just to go back to a little bit about the pattern, remember one thing that the topography which we are seeing here, that's axial topography. That's the sagittal topography. When you want to see the pattern, when you want to do a pattern diagnosis, the sagittal topography works better because it every time takes similar pattern. Like keratoconus, if you have asymmetric bent bow tie with radial skewing, most of the time it will be like that. But in tangential topography, in the same keratoconus also, there would be Hazar shape. So your pattern diagnosis becomes difficult. That's why Dipti said that you can have by default sagittal topography, and whenever you want, you can switch over to tangential. One thing we have to remember, whenever we are talking about such kind of topography in a group, we forget the boundary, because many of us are cornea surgeon, many of us are refractive surgeon, many of us are both. Now, as a refractive surgeon, when you are looking at the topography, your main goal is to make sure that you do not touch an eye which is possibly suspicious cone or such kind of thing. But most of the time, rest everything would be normal. So for you, it would be those subtle findings which you want to find out and pick up. Whereas many things which Dipti was talking about was more relevant to a keratoconus, to a cornea surgeon, and those things which you may not see. Now, so if I split into two parts, that for refractive surgeon, when can you use tangential map? Now, one thing for refractive surgeon, tangential map, and most important, forget about refractive surgeon or not, when you want to see the centration of your ablation, you have to use tangential map only. If you're using axial map, many times there are axial artifacts. What happens? Axial map is pinned towards the center part of the cornea. So everything goes from periphery to center. As you can see from the right map here, everything converges to the center, as if there is center black hole. Everything is going towards the center. That's how the axial topography is. So in post LASIK patient or post refractive surgery patient also, there would be something which would enter into the center part, and you may interpret as either decentered ablation or some island or such kind of thing. So please remember, when you want to look at the centration of your treatment, always use tangential map post refractive surgery treatment. Now, Dr. Ravindra asked that, what is the difference between the sagittal map or any keratometric map measured on elevation-based topographer like Pentacam versus a Placidos-based topographer? Remember, the Placidos-based topographer shows you the first Purkinje image. That's the reflection from the tear film. So any problem with the tear film, whether it's dry eye, whether somebody has touched the eye, somebody has taken the intraocular pressure with the applanation, somebody has done gonioscopy, that topography may suffer. Whereas the topography on elevation-based topographer is done using a slit image which comes on the cornea. So whether that cornea has much tear film or not, it's not going to make huge difference. So many times such kind of abnormal looking topography on Placidos can actually look much normal on the Pentacam. Who is right? Well, it's not about right and wrong. When you have Placidos-based topographer, that tells you the real life. You can simulate the vision with that. If that Placidos-based topographer is highly abnormal, that person may have bad vision, because it would induce a lot of aberration which is coming from the front surface of the tear film. Whereas such patient may show absolutely normal topography on Pentacam. Sometimes you have touched a cornea and you are doing a cataract workup and you have touched the cornea and you do a keratometry or you do a Placidos-based topography, it may come highly abnormal. But the Pentacam may show you a regular astigmatism there. That's more reliable, right? So if we know that what we are looking at and what we want to use it, that's good enough for us. Now, when we looking at the shape of why does shape matter? What is the importance of the shape? If the shape is not uniform or it's not repeatable, your pattern diagnosis would be difficult. And interestingly, entire science of topography, we are actually currently using pattern diagnosis. So that's the reason for the pattern diagnosis, your sagittal topography is very important. But when you want to see, it's like your total deviation and pattern deviation on the visual field. You want to see the localized changes. You want to see the changes which are occurring in smaller area. A tangential map can give you a good view. So for a refractive surgeon, well, tangential map for your follow-up to see the centration of the treatment. For the cornea surgeon, well, keratoconus and those cases, you surely can use that.
Himamshu, there was a really interesting question.
Yes.
So for doing LASIK surgery, what is the accepted protocol? Is it topography or Pentacam or both? Even Dr. Ravindra wants to know, like doing a keratorefractive surgery based only on Placido topography, is it okay?
Sure. So
that's very practice with the current.
Yeah. Sure. So it's very interesting question, Vidyashankar. The answer is, what are you looking for? Right. Now, if in a LASIK patient, in a person, if clinically you are seeing there is Flesher's ring, there is Vogt striae, thinning, and ectasia, of course, you're not trying to search that on the topography there. But in a LASIK patient, what are we looking at? Where what are we trying to rule out? Well, we are trying to rule out if there is something which is a doubtful keratoconus there. Now, there are a lot of terminology which comes across. In one of our articles, we had mentioned different terminologies like keratoconus, form of rustic keratoconus, suspect, and all such kind of thing. So when we talk about form of rustic keratoconus, this is a very old terminology. This is the terminology which was introduced when topography, Placidos-based topography came into the field of cornea. Before that, the diagnosis of keratoconus was based on slit lamp examination and the retinoscopy. After keratography, after the keratoscopy came and after the video keratoscopy came, they said that, you know what, there are cases where you may not pick up slit lamp or you may not pick up possibly on the retinoscopy, but the keratoscopy or video keratoscopy can be abnormal, and they named it as form of rustic keratoconus. Now, gone are those days. We have passed that. We are actually looking at diagnosis based on topography only. Right. So now form of rustic keratoconus, non-form of rustic keratoconus is not very important to us. On topography, there is a pattern of keratoconus. It is keratoconus. We are not going to debate on that unless there are some other issues which we discuss. Form of rustic and all those things do not become very important to me. Now, what important to me is there something which is doubtful, which I'm not able to fit into the definition of keratoconus? Now, that is something which we want to pick up. Now, the question arises, why is it important? Are we safe? Are we confident to treat such kind of cornea with keratorefractive surgery? If we feel confident, go ahead, it's fine, doesn't matter. But if we find that, you know what, there can be risk and we do not want to operate such kind of cases and we want to rule out that, in that case, maybe the early abnormality, early possible problem which are not possibly seen on the front surface can be missed by Placidos-based topography. Having said that, if I play devil's advocate here, what happens if somebody has abnormal pattern and if you do refractive surgery? Does it mean it will become ectatic? Interestingly, no. There are studies done on refractive surgery, PRK, in fact, LASIK also done on form of rustic keratoconus, and they didn't see the progression. I must not convey in any forum that whenever you have abnormal cornea, go ahead and do LASIK. Of course, never. You should never do that because you want to cover yourself legally also, and you do not want to touch such kind of thing. So coming back to that part now, what am I looking at? As a refractive surgeon, I'm looking at, am I dealing with something which is not clinically or topographically can classify as keratoconus? Otherwise, I'm not going to touch that for the refractive surgery. Those subtle signs, those subtle things may not be able to pick up on the Placidos-based topographer, and that's why the topography, which is elevation-based topography, which is important. Now, the other way around argument can be, so many people are doing axial-based topography, the Placidos-based topography, and they are doing LASIK. It's fine. The answer I gave you, that there are studies which are done which showed that quite abnormal corneal shape and the keratorefractive surgery did not show progression. So ectasia is not as simple as we think, that little abnormal shape and it will always become ectatic. But you surely want to be safe legally also. So preferably, I would want to have an elevation-based topographer. Somebody who has Placidos-based topographer, please understand the risk involved. Please understand abnormality which are there in your refraction, as Deepti was showing, different shapes and all those things. Try to be as safe as possible as you can.
So can we safely say that if we have an option or if we have accessibility to do a pentacam, always do a
Of course.
pentacam before you go ahead with the laser refractive surgery. And probably that risk needs to be kept in mind if you are going ahead with only with the placebo based.
Of course, yes.
I hope that completes the discussion. I think Dr. Deepti, you can continue with your presentation regarding the pachymetry. You're not audible, Dr. Deepti. You need to unmute.
Done.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, when you go to the pachymetry, there are two places where you look at. Now this column in the left lower part, which basically gives you three sorts of pachymetry at the pupil center and at the apex, and you have the thinner location. So as we know, normally the corneal pachy should be more than 470 or 480 for many refractive surgeons. But more than that, you also have to look at early signs of FFKCs. The relation between these three would help you do that. Now, look at the overall distribution now, like how you have an elevator giving you a pattern, your topography giving you a pattern. Actually, you have even your thickness map giving you patterns. So this is how generally the pattern of your normal distribution would be. There would be sort of thinnest in the corneal apex, and as we go periphery, it gets thicker. So one way you can pick up early differences is usually the thinnest pachy should not be more than 10 microns thinner than your apex. And if you go to this zone, which is the 4 mm zone, usually the superior inferior thickness difference should not be more than 30 microns. So this is basically because your inferior keratoconus, the inferior pachy would probably get a little thinner before the superior and the central. So an asymmetry, like how you have a superior asymmetry in your tangential or sagittal, again here look at these subtle signs of 30 micron difference. Another very interesting thing is also make sure your thinnest in your right and thinnest in the left, there is not a difference more than 30 microns. Again, these would be important for you to pick up as a refractive surgeon. In a frank case, this would really not matter. Now, this is a very interesting concept of migration of the thinnest pachy. So it is known in early keratoconus that the thinnest point is migrating a little down on your y-axis. So this is beautifully given in your pentacam. So this next to your thinnest location, you have the X meridian and Y meridian. So this is in microns. So if you have a migration of your thinnest point, that means in the y-axis, if it is more than 500 microns, then it is a suspicious cone and suspicious FFKC. And if it is more than 1 millimeter away from your center, then you surely give a red sign and wait for a few months or years and then only plan it. So this is a normal cornea and this is a frank keratoconus. So if you look here, X deviation may not be very important, but do look at that also. And your Y deviation is around almost 1 millimeter in the cone. So this is something, again, subtle signs that you can use. And there is a specific name for the pattern of a pellucid marginal degeneration. If the pachymetry pattern is called as a bell sign. So this is what we were discussing as well. In the Schleimpflug image also gives you a good view of your PMD. So this is also called as a beer belly sign. So I think these, along with your patterns of the topography, if you see this whole central pattern slightly deviated inferior and in the X and Y axis inferiorly, and that is also a subtle sign of FFKC. Dr. Himanshu, would you want to add here?
The one biggest fallacy of pachymetry map is that the entire map of pachymetry is depicted in circles. Right now, if you think about, even if you're not a cornea surgeon, you would know that corneal thickness cannot be uniform only in the circles. Right, the corneal thickness would be quite different in different area, but most of the time when the pentacam does a depiction, it does it in circle. Unless it's really abnormal, it can go. We've done, in fact, a different way of depiction where we could put different shapes onto the pachymetry map, and it was really surprising that the pachymetry maps were looking very different. They were looking quite a different shape and all those things. So remember, again, comes back to the same thing. This is not the true shape of the cornea. This is how it's depicted. From this map, what you want to interpret. And one most important thing which you have to look at is that whenever you see thinnest pachy, which is abnormal or something, always keep a thing on. Dipti, we have any place where we have put the sign of the thinnest pecky on the map?
Yeah.
Okay. So usually thinnest pecky will have a sign as a round circle, which is empty in the center. Yeah, you can see that now, circle. You always want to see that circle. Many times what happens that the map which is larger and the peripheral cornea which is not properly mapped and the data loss is there and your computer sees pachymetry there and it picks up the thinnest pecky there and it shows you here. And for you, whatever you're looking at, or you're looking at the number that, oh, for 400 micron, that's bad. I'm really doomed. Well, but if you look at where is that on the map, and if it is not in the center part, you know that's not reliable, right? So please make sure that you always compare that. Whenever you are looking at any pachymetry changes. So what Dipti said that progression or migration of thinnest point, it's very simple. Yeah, cone is not centered. Now, if cone is centered, there would not be migration. That's okay. It doesn't matter. It's not a golden point that you have to have migration. It's because the center of the cone most of the time is not the center of the cornea. If it's a little decentered, it's going to follow that particular thing. But when you see such kind of drift there, you might want to look into the map that am I missing out anything which is there on the map which looks like keratoconus. Now going to the corneal thickness map. Again, corneal thickness map also suffers same problem what all the elevation-based topographer maps suffer, which is if the data is not reliable, if posterior elevation is not reliable because of the haze or anything. Let's take an example of cross-linking. If you've done cross-linking, you have haze, which is very deep haze. Your posterior elevation would not be reliable. When the posterior elevation is not reliable, your pachymetry map cannot be reliable. So many times you may see that the corneal thickness has come down post cross-linking or something. Don't get alarmed. There can be small change, but that most of the change is related to that posterior surface, which is not reliable. Now you might have post PRK scar, which is on anterior surface. Now there is a lot of reflection from the anterior surface. Now anterior surface is not reliable. If anterior surface is not reliable, neither anterior elevation will be reliable, nor curvature map will be reliable, nor your pachymetry map will be reliable. So such kind of cornea, your pentacam may not give you the true picture. So if post cross-linking, you have haze, which is very superficial, scar kind of thing, very superficial, your pentacam is going to falter there. So you please be aware before you diagnose anything on any of these maps. So pachymetry suffers that issue also. Again, like anything, whichever we do measurement, any measurement will have repeatability issue, right? So now the literature is there out for repeatability of various parameters in normal cornea, in keratoconic cornea. Just go and search for that, and you will find out that there is something which is there in the literature that the pachymetry change, which is 10 to 15 micron, is actually normal in a normal cornea. So such difference may not be reliable. Does it mean that there is no difference? No, that's not the point. When you have a test retest variability, it does not mean that there is no abnormality, but you are not sure about the abnormality. If the abnormality is more, then you are much surer than the smaller abnormality. Now, somebody had asked question that 50 diopter corneal curvature, is it abnormal or not? 47 is it? Well, farther you are away from, so how did that 47.4 or 47.5 came? Well, they took some data, they did a retrospective data analysis, they pulled all the data, they formed a mean, 2 standard deviation on both sides. Oh, most of the data would lie there. Interestingly, it's not the entire world data. This is something what Rabinowitz put in his study, in his data, whatever. So 47.5 is abnormal for Rabinowitz. For you, it may be 48. But for both of us, when it's 55, the chances are very high that you are abnormal. So farther you are away from the mean, the chances are high that you may be abnormal. But does it mean that one parameter means you are dealing with abnormal cornea? Of course not. You can have cornea which is a little steep, but it may not be ectatic cornea. It may not be as in keratoconic cornea, because we do not diagnose keratoconus based on one parameter only, right? So anything like even in pachymetry, whenever you go farther away from the general mean, you are likely that you may be abnormal. So if your corneal thickness is 400 micron, the chances are it's abnormal. But if your corneal thickness is 490, you still may be fine, right? So remember that part when you're interpreting this data. Now, the last part was when she, can you show the next slide of that PMD? Now, pellucid margin degeneration, I keep hearing a lot of such kind of thing. Again, see, remember, to write an article, you can put many things together. Now, when you have such kind of cornea, you do not diagnose pellucid marginal degeneration on topography. You would be a blind person would be able to diagnose this cornea on slit lamp. A pellucid marginal degeneration is diagnosed on slit lamp. So please do not get into pellucid looking cone or something. I don't think there is any confusion there. It does not become confusing. When there is significant abnormality on the topography, on slit lamp, you would be able to pick up. By default, you have to remember that against the rule, astigmatism pattern, so horizontal bow tie pattern, unless proved otherwise, is abnormal. Try to rule out your pellucid marginal degeneration. Very typically, pellucid margin, this is not a right forum to discuss about this thing, but pellucid looking keratoconus is something which we have invented. If you look at the way the topography, every finding follows in whether the thinnest point, whether the most ectatic cornea, most elevated cornea, everything will fall there. It's just that it's little decentered. That does not make it pellucid, right? But where pellucid, the center cornea looks pristine, everything is fine. But on your topography, you would have horizontal astigmatism, which will skew in the periphery. And just below that center part of horizontal, there would be significant amount of flattening. And then both of them will join. And then clinically, of course, you would be able to pick up this thing. So I really don't think we should get into too much that. It's a clinical diagnosis, and let's diagnose it clinically. But having said anything against the rule, yeah, there is a red flag there.
Great, sir. So we'll touch upon this. We'll look into this a little in detail when we do the Presbyl assay. But basically, again, Q value is a good value to have a look at. Basically, we know our corneas are prolate, steeper in the center and gets flatter as we go. So that is basically depicted by your Q values. So normally it is minus range. It could be minus 0.2 plus or minus 0.2 again. So again, it could be an additional sign when you're looking at borderline cases. So you do have an increase in your Q value, or your cornea becomes more prolate when there is ectasias and also with age. And the opposite, the oblate happens when you have a myopic decentration. So again, a few values, you can make sure your float dia is around 8 mm. Make sure your display is around 9 millimeter. And your Q value is around 6 usually, 6 mm zone. Your AC depth should be internal. And these are the few settings that you can have a look at even in the printout. So again, a lot of other things which comes in, but one practical important thing in your QuadMap area would be your AC depth. Make sure this is from internal, that is you're measuring from the endothelium, as you would want the measurements to be more than 2.8 in an ICL. Again, a lot of other utilities, we can see the corneal volume. Again, a lot of studies have used this parameter on progression of keratoconus, the corneal value volume becoming lesser. Chamber volume, again, post PI, that could help you in, look at the chamber volume. And angle, again, is something you could use it if required. So to end it with this case, now this is a straightforward quad map. You have a abnormal front and the back, and then you have quite a thin pachymetry here around 430. So as we have kept saying, is this keratoconus? Certainly no. Your topography is not matching. In fact, wherever the thinnest point, it's very flat. So again, you cannot diagnose anything based on the topography. This is a patient who has a corneal scar, but most of your scans do look like an abnormal cornea with a keratoconus. So that's why it's only going to help you add on to your clinical diagnosis. And we have seen n number of cases, which probably next week we'll have a bunch of interesting cases which look different, but the pathology may be a little different. So always make sure you do a perfect slit lamp examination and then use the Pentacam or any other device to help you further know your diagnosis. So I think Pentacam has certainly been a game changer in cornea refractive practice. It's extremely repeatable, reliable. I think for a few more decades, it's here to stay. Somehow the 8-step guide, whatever we have done, I think if we look at the entire quad map in these stepwise, it's very, very tough to miss out any suspicious cases. So I thank you. That's the end of my presentation, and we'll open it up.
Yeah, that's
Very
an
nice.
excellent.
One point I'll just touch upon the asphericity part. Now, I somehow am not a great fan of asphericity measurement, what we do on Pentacam. The Pentacam takes asphericity measurement from minimum 6 millimeter zone. That's 20 degree to 6 millimeter to 10 millimeter zone. And by default, most of the time, it's 8 millimeter zone, which is taken, which is not actually anything reliable, which is not anything important to mean any case, whether it's a case of, say, spherical IOL or aspherical IOL, or whether I'm looking at the treatment on Contura or anything. Also, the measurement of asphericity is taken in hemimeridians, where superior and inferior hemimeridians, I mean, two hemimeridians, like how you have K1, K2, like that, they are averaged out from hemimeridian, they make one meridian. Then two hemimeridians are averaged out and they finally give you one value. So if you look at the entire map, which you can see on the Pentacam, when you see there are so many variation in the asphericity value, and finally they give you one number, and we follow that one number, which is highly fictitious, and I really don't think we should give too much importance to that. It's nice to look at that number, but please do not go by that number too much.
Thank you, Dr. Deepti and Dr. Himanshu. I think we have an interesting case presentation by Dr. Preeti also. We'll quickly finish off that, then we'll come to the question and answer part.
Sure, sir.
Dr. Preeti, are you ready, madam? You can share your screen.
Yeah, is it visible, sir?
Yes, very much. You can go ahead, please.
So this is an interesting case. We had a 17-year-old girl who visited us for unilateral decrease in her vision. So on examination, her uncorrected visual acuity in the right eye was 6.6, and in the left eye it was counting finger 3 meters. On refraction, right eye was emmetropic, while left eye showed a myopia of -3.25. We have done a cyclopent refraction, and it's the same. There are no changes in that. The uncorrected visual acuity in 2017 was 6.6 in the right eye and 6.18 in the left eye. So she had visited us 4 years back, and she had visited us for a STI. So at that time, no refraction was done. Only the visual acuity is what is available. So now we see that there is a significant decrease in the visual acuity, uncorrected visual acuity of the left eye. There was no significant history of any eye allergies, no constant eye rubbing. She is not a contact lens user, and there is no significant family history suggestive of any corneal pathologies. Slit lamp examination was within normal limits. There were no corneal scars or no signs of keratoconus also. Fundus examination was within normal limits. So this is a
Preeti,
pentacam
ma'am?
scan. Yeah.
This, when was the second presentation? 2017 was the first
So
presentation.
recently, just before the lockdown. Yeah.
2021. Okay.
Yes.
Fine.
Yeah. So this is her pentacam scan. This shows the right eye, and in the right eye, her K1 is 47.5, K2 is 49.3, which shows an astigmatism of -1.8 topographically. The Q values look okay, and it is a pretty thick cornea with the thinnest locale of 617. The Kmax is 50 diopters, and there's no significant deviation of the thinnest locale on the y-axis. So if we see the sagittal curvature map over here, it shows a asymmetric bow tie pattern with a superior steepening, but the superior and inferior values differ by 1.4. So not very significant. The elevation, back elevation map shows almost a central island with the increased values in the island. The front elevation maps show pretty normal values, and the corneal thickness map shows a uniformly thick cornea. The corneal, so do you want me to explain this? And basically, most of the values are within normal limits. All the indices in the 8 millimeter zone look to be okay. And even the corneal thickness profile map was quite normal. The Bellin-Ambrosio map showed a D value of 2.32. Now coming to the left eye, the K1 is 47.5, K2 is 48.4, and astigmatism of -0.9 topographically. In this eye, the cornea thickness was 597, which is the thinnest locale, and the Kmax is 48.7, which is lesser than the right eye. In this eye, in the sagittal map, there was no significant pattern which was seen, and the back elevation map showed a central island with increased values, and this appeared to be more prominent than the right eye. The elevation map in the left eye also, in the front elevation map of the left eye also showed an island pattern, which was not visible in the right eye. Again, the corneal thickness map showed a significant corneal thickening. The corneal spatial profile map and all the indices otherwise look to be quite within normal limits. And the D value in this eye was 2.87, almost similar to the other eye. So now here is a patient, 17 years old girl with progressive myopia in the left eye, correcting to 6.6 in both the eyes. Right eye is anyway emetropic. And we haven't done refraction earlier, but the very fact that she had a 6.18 vision that time, and now it has become counting fingers, close to 3 meters, which is improving by -3.25 to 6.6, shows that it has progressed in the left eye. There is no significant, there's no astigmatism, and the pentacam scan shows high K values, in fact higher in the right eye, islands mainly on the back elevation map, and a thick cornea. So the reason why we did a pentacam scan here was because of the high K values. So that was the reason why I did. And we haven't done a biometry to check the axial myopia to rule it out. So now the question is, what is the differential diagnosis? And looking at her age and the fact that it might be progressing, do we do any treatment right now, or do we wait for further signs of progression? Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Himanshu,
yeah, so most
because Dr. Himanshu,
yeah, please.
This discussion, today's discussion with respect to refractive surgery, probably, I know Dr. Preeti asked whether what needs to be done now, because she's 17 years. Probably can we stick to the interpretation or of the map or something like that? rather than what to do. If Dr. Preeti feels okay with that.
Sure, sure.
Perfect. So simple thing. Now it's very simple. Now we know the myopia. There are three common types of myopia. We look at curvature myopia, index myopia, and axial myopia. The index myopia, I hope that young patient, no cataract. Of course, you've done cycloplegic refraction. It's stable and it's not any spasm of accommodation or something. Curvature wise, yes, it is steep cornea, but still both eyes are similar.
Yeah.
And the third part which is missing is axial part, which we have not measured. So unless proved otherwise, I would bet my money that you are looking at an axial myopia. And that's the first thing which I would like to measure, and measure serially the axial length. Now, does it fit into any pattern of, now what if those posterior elevation on exclusion map? Please remember, it's an exclusion map. That's not how there is elevation. But when we do an exclusion map where we remove the center 4 millimeter, 4.5 millimeter, and then try to fit a best fit sphere, it enhances. So it's enhanced ectasia. It's not true ectasia. So on enhanced ectasia on posterior surface, it shows some changes. Now, when the changes do not come on the anterior surface, it's not going to reflect on the refraction as well as into the vision part. So your decreased vision, your change in the refraction cannot be related to those changes which we are seeing in exclusion map. So does it mean it's normal? Of course, I'm not saying it's normal. You should follow up this case and keep an eye on this thing if there are any changes which are occurring. Also, one interesting history you gave, that patient had come with STI earlier. Once, a few years back, Dr. Sujit Nainar from Kerala Ophthalmic Society, he had presented a case where recurrent chalazion was altering the corneal shape and was looking like keratoconic eye. So when one eye had such kind of thing, you might want to keep an eye on that and might want to at least treat that lid part. But at this point of time, I would say I'll just measure axial length, follow up the case. And at this point of time, I don't think I'm rather touching anything here.
So just a quick question, Dr. Himanshu, are you going to do C3R for it? Yes or no, right now, immediately?
I'm not even diagnose it as a keratoconus. I'm not even going to tell patient you have keratoconus. So why C3R? I'm not going to tell my assistant also this is keratoconus. So no, come on. There's no cross-linking involved here.
That's correct. That's good. That's good.
So how do we take an exclusion map? How do we do that?
That's a Bellin-Ambrose display.
The Bellin-Ambrose, yeah.
I think next
week we can discuss.
Yeah, we have that included.
Okay, sure. Okay.
Dr. Himanshu, just last maybe question.
Can you stop sharing the screen?
Yeah, sure.
The discussion is over.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Himanshu, in these kind of thick corneas, have you seen this posterior elevation, or what's your experience tells us in thick corneas? How the posterior elevation, is there any correlation?
Yeah, again, everything is based on, remember one thing, we deconstruct every part and we try to search answer for every part. Now we try to search answer for thick cornea. Is there any elevation change? Interestingly, thick cornea can be sometimes cornea which are swollen, where the corneal thickness alters, where the central corneal thickness, which is usually the center versus peripheral ratio, is 0.87 to 0.9, not more than that. In the case of corneal edema, that alters, it increases. And then, of course, it does not follow any pattern at all. Now, does it mean that every thick cornea is edematous cornea? Of course not. So some of the thick corneas, which are regular thick cornea, it can still, like how in this case, it was following the trend. So it can follow the trend line. It's absolutely fine. But what is the reason for thick cornea? That's interesting too. So one question in the question answer was, can we do cross-linking with Placidos-based topographer and pachymetry? Yes, you can, but this is what exactly you will not be able to measure. You will not be able to see the abnormality in the corneal thickness, in which area how much abnormality, center to peripheral ratio, and all such kind of thing you'll miss. And that's the reason why you need Pentacam. So yes, thick cornea can show altered, but it depends on what part of thick cornea which we are looking at.
Thank you, Dr. Himanshu. Dr. Yelan or Dr. MS Ravindra sir, do you want to add anything? Dr. Prashant?
Yeah,
quick.
I have a small point here about the sphericity Dr. Himanshu was mentioning.
Can we discuss that next week? Because we'll be having more discussion on the sphericity, because that area-wise discussions. If you, yeah, you can go ahead with the question. So that
no, I thought the sphericity part is over this week, so I just thought.
Okay, fine. Please go ahead, sir.
Should we do it this time or next time?
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
You can go ahead.
Okay. See, Dr. Himanshu, you said sphericity is not a very important parameter that we look at with the Pentacam. Probably based on your experience of the technicality that goes into measuring the sphericity in the Pentacam. Am I right there?
Not only that, it's about also the clinical correlation with that value, which is not so great.
I would just like to have an opinion here. I'll just share the screen. See, we all know that the cornea is an spherical structure. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible. It's
okay. This is the quadratic spheric map that is given by a Pentacam reading. We all know that the cornea is not exactly spherical. The sphericity increases as we increase the diameter of the cornea. Am I right there?
Yes.
The central part of the cornea is less spheric compared to the central. If you take only the central few millimeters of the cornea, that is less aspheric than if you take the cornea as a whole.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So when we take when we are taking the Pentacam readings in a relative sense, not the absolute sense of numbers, we can actually look at this quadratic spheric map where we see the sphericity of each meridian in 6 millimeter, 7 millimeter, 8 millimeter, 9 millimeter, and 10 millimeter zones, which the Pentacam offers the data. So when we see an sphericity which is more, like you see in the, I'm using my mobile phone. I don't know. I have no way I can,
No,
show you the picture. If you can see
very clearly
millimeter
visible.
zone, if I can zoom it up like that. If you
No,
see
you
the
can
6 millimeter
see
zone and the
earlier
superior area, it is showing an sphericity of minus 0.86. Suppose you go to the whole 10 millimeter cornea, it is showing minus 0.71. I feel this is a very significant finding that we see on Pentacam. In a normal cornea, the 6 millimeter zone should show a lesser sphericity compared to a 10 millimeter zone. So when you see a point like this in a 6 millimeter zone in one of the quadrants, especially the inferior or the nasal quadrant, is showing a higher sphericity compared to the 10 millimeter zone in the same quadrant, then I feel it's a red flag sign. Though we don't consider the numbers as a whole, like Dr. Himanshu says, when we're talking relative terms.
I may differ here because what happens is the asphericity measurement is done on ring. It's done on, it's not entire zone. It's done on the ring.
Correct.
Now, 6 millimeter zone for the visual axis is not useful. And from there, if you're looking, now just forget about one reading. Look at the entire row there, entire column there. You have temporal, which is minus 0.18. You have superior, which is minus 0.86. And you averaged out both of them, and you gave it 0.77 there and 0.49 there. You again averaged out, and if you can just go a little bit past there, and then you said 0.86, and then again horizontal, you did similar thing. If you look at the normal pupil diameter of around 4 millimeter in Indian population, none of these asphericity value actually can come into picture, and it does not actually do anything great at all. The shape which you are looking at, asphericity, is Q value is not shape. Asphericity is not, so spherical aberration and Q value are different. Spherical aberration is aberration, which is measured in micron, where Q values are shape factor, which does not have any unit. So when you do a treatment, when you flatten the cornea, when you change the curvature, you can maintain Q value, but you cannot maintain spherical aberration. You will induce spherical aberration, then only you can treat the refractive error.
Yeah.
So the shape factor which you look at, in that one reading, you compare with absolute periphery, I really don't think I would go into, but of course, if you believe that's useful for you, you surely can use it. In my hand, I don't give too much this thing, but I'm sure we surely can agree to disagree.
Yeah, the point point of my contention is only this one. See, you keep on serially observing this this particular data. In normal patients, this doesn't happen. The central asphericity compared to the peripheral asphericity is always lesser. You can probably keep comparing. I mean, each of us, we are 100 people here.
It's not center. 6 millimeters is mid periphery. It's not. It's not center.
Correct. You're right. But it's
so we're not worried about that part. It's that's not the strong point of Pentacam. Pentacam, I would be betting my money on the center cornea, whatever Pentacam measure. Anything which goes in the periphery, I don't bet my money on Pentacam.
Okay. No, I understand entirely. I'm entirely with you, but I just want to bring one attention to this particular point, that we can keep observing this. We may not depend on it right now. We are 100 people here. Let us keep observing. Let us keep observing this.
Sir, there is
you see a pattern here. I have seen a pattern.
Wants to make a point, I think. Dr. Elan, please.
There is another red flag here, sir, what Himanshu was pointing out. See, when you carefully look at a normal Pentacam, if you look at these values, can you please put it back again?
Okay.
See, what Himanshu was pointing out, superior, inferior, there's a huge amount of difference. In case of a normal cornea, this will not be there. Again, Himanshu, this is not the method to use. Definitely, yes. But this is one of the red flag signs, if you notice. That's what I think Prashant sir is trying to tell. It's one of the red flag signs.
Sure. I agree that there is something which is not usual looking, and we can always keep an eye on that. I agree with that. Dr. Prashant, and
I think the point is very well taken. Yeah, I think
this patient, just let me introduce this patient. This patient is an other eye of a patient having keratoconus. The other eye is having a frank keratoconus. And this eye, unfortunately, I don't have the rest of the maps here. This is the way it looks. And if you carefully look, this is the only abnormality I can see in this particular whole map, that the central asphericity is higher than the peripheral asphericity in one of the quadrants. So if each of us 100 people here, we take note of this and keep on observing this, we may get to some sort of a data collection or whatever it is. This is just a small point I just wanted to bring out when Dr. Himanshu said about the asphericity. That's about
I think we all needs to keep watch on that asphericity part in most of these so-called borderline cases.
Yeah, agreed.
So with that, I think it's time up now. It's already 10:30. We have come to the end of this part. So we can continue with the discussion in the WhatsApp group as well.
Yeah.
So Dr. Deepti, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I've heard so many talks on the Pentacam, but this is very good. I think everybody will be very happy. If they are new to this, they can go ahead and read about it. I think Dr. Sudha has shared a very good one interpretation of Pentacam on link in the WhatsApp group. They can go ahead and read about that. That will be very good. And we'll come in the next week, and we'll continue with this discussion on the other maps of the Pentacam reading. Thank you, Dr. Prashant, for arranging this. Dr. Elan, Dr. Himanshu, a special thank you for sparing time with us. Always really nice to hear your talk. Okay, and everyone, Dr. Prashant, Dr. Ravindra, thank you very much. Dr. Somnath, for your introduction today. So with this, we'll wind up this session. And Dr. Deepti, do you have to say anything?
I'll thank you, sir, for an excellent moderation.
Thank Dr. Vijay Shankar and Dr. Himanshu.
Thank you.
each
Thank
of
you
the
so
participants
Thank
for
you.
being with us.
We'll
and thank you so
see you
much.
all next week again, 9 o'clock.
Yes, sir. We'll see
Sure.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. We can
Bye-bye. Good
close
week
this.
to all
Bye.
of you.
Have
you.
a nice day.
Good
Safe.
night,
Safe.
then we'll end the meeting now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.